Hello, my name is Christopher Cumming. For my topic, I chose the impact of unionization on compensation and innovation. My title, a fragile union, kind of gets at what I will discuss later as the overall decline of unions, particularly in the private sector. So we'll start. What are unions? So unions are organizations that advocate and negotiate on behalf of workers for higher wages and salaries, safer worker conditions, and they also help to influence and establish programs, policies, and laws that help protect jobs and ensure workers' rights, among other things that benefit um, workers. Why do we have unions? So, because of the industrialization period, which would have been between the 1700s and maybe the mid to late 1800s, there was an increase in manufacturing, coal mining, and things like that, that were or was a result of an increase in demand for consumer goods. So people were, the world was advancing. They were incomes were higher. People had more jobs. Um, there was a lot of new wealth, and so there was a demand to buy things, primarily of. Uh, so private and public unions are very similar. So I'll go over some of the ways that there are some more complicated ways that they differ, which I talk about in my paper. Those have to do with market outcomes, but I won't get that deep for a matter of time. So both use collective bargaining to set wages and determine compensation increases. And how collective bargaining works is that employees get together and they decide kind of what they want to be paid and uh, um, what kind of compensations they want and benefits and some other details. They meet with a representative who then takes their demands, I call them, to the employer, and they strike a agreement with the employer on what to pay. And so that's how collective bargaining works. But so sorry, both have as their um, primary aim to increase compensations and minimize pay inequality. I'll get to that in more detail in a moment. And both involve the membership and representation fees. So when you belong to a union, you have to pay a fee to be a part of that union, and you also pay representative fees and dues, and that's to pay for the representatives and the lawyers that are involved in the negotiation process. So we can now look at some of the effects of compensation that unions have had, kind of the meat of our presentation and my research paper. So unions have helped establish a 40-hour work week. They've helped to establish overtime pay standards. They've helped to establish other benefits such as paid time off, employer-provided health care, short and long-term disability, EAP programs. They've helped to establish minimum pay standards and laws and other workers' rights. Um, Notoriously, they've helped to establish pension and other retirement vehicles, which unions are known for. It's been a great deal on. So those are some of a few of the things that they've accomplished in terms of compensation. Effects on compensation continue just kind of in greater detail. So unions have they've created competition between them and non-union firms. Non-union firms they fear becoming unionized. So as a result, they've raised their compensation and other benefit standards to be similar to that of the compensations in non-union firms or in union firms, and that has worked to the benefit of both union and non-union workers. They've helped reduce pay inequities as a result of race and cultural identity, gender, and nepotism. This is a big accomplishment. In the early days of unions, they were very exclusive, so they did not allow blacks and other minorities to be a part of their unions. Today, um, blacks actually make up the majority of union workers. So they've come a long ways. They've also helped to establish workplace laws such as the FMLA, child labor and disability laws. Um, so they've done a lot. Just to name a few. This chart is actually quite significant. This is the compensations between union and non-union. I'm sorry, union versus non-union labor. And the difference here is that, as you can see, union members make more money than non-union members. And again, this is a huge change since Freeman's work around 1980, which showed that there was a 10% difference between union compensation and non-union compensation, which then meant that non-union members made 10% more in that time than union members. And again, this is that they've come a long ways in raising the pay of workers, as well as the working conditions and other factors of the workplace. Some of the disadvantages of unions, so they tend to weigh down public and private budgets. You see this a lot with uh, major cities that tend to be heavily unionized. They have trouble paying their pension plans, and they have trouble um, even paying their workers because of one, economic conditions, and two, often it's been argued that the salaries of government workers are just too high, and the cities can't afford to pay them. This has so some of these demands have led to layoffs and furloughs and the overall decline of union membership. Um, so what happens, like a scenario, is that you have to lay off or a certain number of essential workers because you can't afford to pay them because you're still paying the retirement pensions of people who used to do that job. And so that creates a public nuisance, but it also leads to public deficits. Um, Unionized labor increases business costs, which has been found to inhibit um, productivity and business growth as well. So this is just a chart of the union density, also very uh, important. So you see in the 1940s and 1960s, there was a spike in the union membership of private unions, which makes sense because you had your baby boomers. So there was a demand and need for a lot of consumer products, housing, things like that. So a lot of those things were uh, being created and jobs were being created to support that boom. And then as things start to decline, the private unions sort of to respond to the market dictates, which they should do. Now your public unions have remained constant, and that's because these are your essential workers. So your firemen, your police officers, and things like that. So that has remained constant, and that's the sort of a lot of debate. Some people believe that government workers are overly paid, that their pay should be more in line with the private sector. When things like education experience and things like that are considered. Here's my citation page, and I want to thank you all for listening.